get going? We'll barely take a breath.
Okay. All right, I want to thank you all so much for being here tonight, and I'm so grateful for this opportunity to speak here tonight. But I especially want to thank the members of the Monroe County Historical Society who are here with me tonight. I appreciate that so much that y'all came with me. I am not a professional speaker by no means, but these individuals that are traveling with, that are here with me tonight will tell you that I was born to communicate. And it took me several years to own it, but eventually I did. And on top of what is here that you need to know about me, you need to know that in addition to being born to communicate, I have fun everywhere I go, and I intend that we will have fun tonight. I am perpetually optimistic, and I promise Katie an interactive presentation. So that's where I thought we were going when I started this, but it kind of leaned this other way. So the interaction for you mostly, but not entirely, is going to be that you're going to read your own screen, because I'm not going to stand up here and read for you what is written in front of you. I want to ask, before we go any further, does everybody have a basic knowledge of the history of Old Mulkey? Is there anybody that doesn't know the significance of Old Mulkey? Because this whole presentation is based on the fact that everybody does. So if you don't, see me after this presentation, because we definitely need to catch you up, okay? The title was Old Mulkey, the history we're taught, the things I've learned. Before we can discuss those things, we have to realize where the history I was taught came from. My parents, my grandparents, that's the Gold Brick High School over at Tompkinsville High School where I graduated. So my educators played a role in what I was taught. And then, of course, in today's very modern world, we all use the internet, and that's an excerpt from Old Mulkey's website. You can visit that at parks.ky.gov. We also get a lot of information, and especially I did when I started working at the park, just from old files that were there. So I'm not going to cite the source of every slide that we're going to go through, but it comes from a combination of these things, the things that we're taught, okay? How many of you have heard and or believe that Old Mulkey is the first church west of the Appalachian Mountains? Has anybody ever heard that before? Okay, Larry's shaking his head. I believed that right up until I started working at the park as a 47-year-old woman. And while I'm not here to dispute that fact, unless we can move the boundary of the Appalachian Mountains much further west, I can pretty well guarantee you that we're not the first church west of the Appalachians. I did my research in this J.H. Spencer's History of Kentucky Baptists, which, if you're not familiar with that book, I just really like it. And we're 91. It took us a long time to get there. Again, my whole life, right up until I started working there, I knew of only two names that were ever associated with the meeting house. The first one was Mill Creek Baptist Church. And then it was Old Mulkey, the Old Mulkey Meeting House. Never heard it called anything else. But actually, the congregation there incorporated in the 1840s as Mill Creek Christian Church. This one, you will notice, has the word were. We were taught the list of members, okay? I saw a list of members hanging in that meeting house my whole life. Sarah Lou, has there always been one there?
Where's that?
Yes, okay. And so I was taught that it came directly from the Book of Records, and here is just an excerpt from the Book of Records. Now this is a very important roster. People come from all over the United States and foreign countries to see their ancestors' name on the wall in the meeting house. Unfortunately, I learned that a lot of the names have been corrected to modern day spelling. I don't know why they didn't put an R on Grace Rush. I'm sure that was Grace Rush. But the man who recorded it in the Book of Records didn't put an R. But the man who created the roster did. Without fail, every incident of a E.L., Polly, Sally, all of the Libby, those were all corrected. L-E-Y, those were all corrected to just L-Y. I'm sorry, that bothers me. Okay, if we are going to be historians, which I already told you I'm not, but if we're going to be and we're going to transcribe history, we need to transcribe it the way it was written, even if we think it's wrong. Well, I don't know how many of you remember Miss Carolyn Campbell, but Miss Carolyn Campbell and I spent hours with that list. You know, it was written in this whole arm motion, very, very hard to read. And we spent hours trying to get the list that hangs in the meeting house to the spelling that was in the Book of Records as close as we could interpret it. And there is a copy of this. I have a copy with me. If anybody wants to look at it after a while, we'll be happy to go over that and talk about that with you. Now, we did alphabetize it simply because it's easier for those people that are looking, and especially if it's a tour bus that comes in, it's easier for them to find that name. But otherwise, we kept all this spelling, as like I said, as closely as we could. We also assumed that that list was complete. I mean, it was hanging there. Surely they wouldn't have hung up an incomplete list. But what happens when we assume? Okay? So while Miss Campbell and I were trying to correct the spelling on the roster that had hung there forever, we realized that the record keeper was not always uniform in how he kept the record. There were numerous entries where he would record the names of individuals who had joined the church, but he didn't bring them over to the list. I don't know why. Maybe he knew they'd already left. I have no idea. But that was the first thing I noticed. Then I noticed, hey, wait a minute. There are times when he would note maybe 5 joined by living testimony, 4 by letter, and he would leave blanks as if he intended to go back and fill them in, and he failed to. This bothered me to my core. This was very upsetting to me, so much so that I went back to the clerk of my church and I said, okay, August 1974, make sure it says Sheila, S-H-E-I-L-A, Job joined this church. So, once again, we spent hours. Another thing that we found was often by the very nature of an entry, that individual had to have belonged to the church. For example, if someone was dismissed, they wouldn't have dismissed someone that didn't belong to their local body. If someone was serving on a committee, the congregation would not have asked someone from a different local body to serve on one of their committees. So we made a list of all those people too. So now we have, hanging in the meeting house, the names of all the people that I found that either were listed and not carried over, or that by the nature of the entry we know had to have been members. And we included with this definitions of some of the terms, like when it would say an individual was under the watch care of the church. We explained what the watch care is. If someone was dismissed, what did that mean? So that is now gives a lot of other people an opportunity to see their family member's name hanging in the meeting house. There are lots of adjectives used to describe John Mulkey. Lots of them. Some are good, some not so good. But I can tell you for a fact who taught me this one thing. It was my mother. And she told me to never judge someone by what someone else says about them. That I should make my own opinion, draw my own opinion. And it is my opinion that from my research that he was a man of great conviction. John Mulkey was a third generation separate Baptist preacher. To turn his back on that had to have taken conviction in how he now interpreted the doctrine. And I know you might not be able to read this whole thing, but in my opinion, John Mulkey was also a man of peace. This is taken from a circular that he drafted, and he drove over here to Glasgow to have it printed. So we didn't have the ability to have it printed yet in Monroe County. It is a very, very lengthy circular. It is the only writing of any significance that we have from John Mulkey. This was actually 12 years after the famous split of the congregation. And if you were to read the whole document, you will not find a bitter, hateful, grouchy man. I mean, he was much nicer about it than I would have been when it was brought back up by the church and the association 12 years after the fact. This one kind of goes without saying, right? You see a gravestone and it's got a name and a date on it, and you know, we're taught that means that person's buried there. This is one of the biggest issues that I have dealt with in my 15 years at Old Mulkey, is that people don't read the fine print. Because unfortunately, that's not always the case. You know, a lot of cemeteries have memorials. And we have copies of the Tompkinsville News, and DAR has records supporting the fact that they created a memorial section in the cemetery at Old Mulkey. Now, I had the opportunity to go through our cemetery with the state's archaeologist, and he told me there's no doubt that what our memorial section of our cemetery wasn't placed right on top of old graves that had been lost to Mother Nature. And I'm sure that's true. But those are still memorials. Another thing that you should take into consideration when you visit a cemetery, all of the markers in our memorial, a Revolutionary War memorial section of our cemetery, they not only have the name, but they have some type of identifying information that makes you to know that that individual served in the American Revolution. There were no battles fought in the American Revolution into Kentucky, in South Central Kentucky. And there was no such thing as a National Cemetery Administration. So when you see rows of military markers that date back for men who served in that time, you have to think, wait a minute, we're in South Central Kentucky, no national cemeteries. These men would have been buried by their family members somewhere. So we do have several graves in the memorial section of our cemetery. Last fall, We put up one for Abraham Heston. We are still open to that if someone wants to work with the park to do that. And those memorials are put in the row. There is an Allen, Barron, Cumberland, Metcalf, Monroe rows, and their marker is placed in the row where they were living when they applied for their pension. Does anybody in here own a business? Katie has this wonderful facility that she takes care of. Do you ever put up signage indicating what people can or cannot do? Okay, a lot of businesses do that. Now, I don't know why we don't have camping at Old Mulkey. That's just, for conversation's sake. But I ask you to pay particular attention to the one over there to my far left, okay? We all know that occasionally people, and we certainly learned this during COVID, that people don't always read the signage you put up. Well, I'll tell you something else. Snakes don't either. Okay? I don't do snake. Not on any level do I do snake. Okay? This one showed up during Old Mulkey's quilt event and took up residence in our treble machine. And he stayed there until somebody else came to get him out. Don't do snakes, okay? So it is, but they do show up. Now, I have been quoted many times because I've said it, that there's little signage all over my park that says no snakes allowed, but I'm telling you, they still show up. And what is so amazing that I've learned that the people who come to visit my park, when they happen up on one, they all think I want to know, and I don't. Okay? Let me tell you, Sam, if you come to visit Old Mulkey and you get on the other side of a snake from me, you're on your own. I do not do snakes. Okay? Oh, y'all don't really, I thought I took that one out. Okay, but this is a true story. We had one in the office, and we did cry snake. Me and my intern did. And the city of Tompkinsville, Harold Frazier came out to take care of it for us. And it turned out to be a stuffed animal, but he did laugh. I meant to take that one out. Okay. My father watched every Western that was on regular television on the 3 channels that we got. And I watched them with him because I was his remote control. If I wasn't in there when he was watching them, I had to come from another room, right? And I was definitely under the impression that, hey, if you get scalped by Indians, you're surely going to die. But that wasn't the case. There were many people who survived being scalped by Indians, including Miss Hannah Boone Stewart Pennington, who is the most popular resident of the cemetery at Old Mulkey. I will tell you that when we learned this because one of her descendants shared that with Lyman Draper when he was creating the Draper manuscripts. And he was told that Miss Hannah bore the scar of that traumatic event the rest of her life. It happened when she was a young teenager. So I'm thinking 13, 14 years old. Well, when I came across this information, I just had to know, how they treat it. What do you do for somebody that's been scalped and survived? And one, I don't know specifically how they treated Miss Hannah's injury, but one treatment of the time, obviously they had tinsmiths, and they would take melted tin and pour over the skull and pull the scalp to melt it and fuse it, what pieces, loose pieces they could. Enough said about that, right? We're moving right along. Is there anybody in this room that has not been taught how to write your name? Because all the rest of us would be happy to help you. And this goes without saying, right? We all know how to write our names. Unfortunately, a lot of people are not taught where their name goes. Now, I know that you can't tell really well, but there's something between, I didn't count them, 18 and 24 lines of writing. And that is taken, that's a picture of the meeting house wall. A section of chinking on the meeting house wall. Now that's just one section. So we battle this all the time. And any time that I give what I call the 20-minute spiel to a school group, especially school groups, but a church group, any group that I speak in front of, I tell them, know where your name goes. Your parents did not spend 9 months trying to figure out what they were going to name you for you to write it on a public place. That's for you to write on the check that you get when you start working your first job, so you can open a bank account, so you can put that money in there, so you can get it out when you put your name on the title to a 1968 Camaro. Okay? Your name does not go on public places. And I'll ask students, what is the biggest threat to Old Mulkey? Oh, I know. It's a tornado. No. Oh, I know. It's fire. No. Oh, I know, Miss Rush, I know. It's termites. No. It's you. And I try to really always get that across. The biggest threat to any historical building or sign is human beings. How many of y'all remember where you were at when you heard that Elvis had died? I could take you within inches of where I was at. I know exactly what I was working on. I'm happy to report that was false. Okay? The CBS News interrupted my favorite soap opera and reported incorrectly. And I know that because this is the register and this is just one of them. He comes about once every 2 or 3 years. But it says right there, Elvis of Memphis, Tennessee. Now, I share this with you to point out that whenever you visit this wonderful facility or any other historical site, the meeting house, and they've got a register out, please sign it. It is important. And I count every name, everyone. And if it says, the Rush family, okay, that's 4 people, is how I do that. And I report this to Frankfurt. I tell them, in this time period, the furthest away anyone traveled was, Arizona, from Arizona. I tell them the most popular adjectives used to describe the meeting house. So whenever you have that opportunity, I just want to encourage you to take advantage of it. Old Mulkey is the 9th oldest Kentucky state park in the system. We became a state park in November of 1931. And since that time, yes, the Commonwealth of Kentucky has provided for its care. What a lot of people may not know is that Old Mulkey has the smallest budget of any of the Kentucky state parks. And the reason that I want to share that with you is so that you will have a greater understanding of when you visit the park and you see a sign on the door that says, I'm sorry, you're going to have to find the park worker on duty outside and he'll come and open the gift shop for you. It's because we don't have the money for a staff to be there. And we choose, although Frankfurt has asked us on numerous occasions to go to 5 days a week, I refuse that. Old Mulkey is my community's day park. Our playground is very, very busy. And I don't want to go to 5 days a week. And they say, well, you'll still get your same hours in. That's not the point. This is my community's day park. So Old Mulkey operates on a staff of 1.8 people. And someone asked me just this week, 0.8, what? Is the other person working with a diminished capacity? And I said, no, but he is only part-time. I only have him for 8.5 months out of the year. So if you're there and you want to come in the gift shop, you want to research in our little park library, and I'm not there or I'm out on the park, come and find us.